help me out with something. What are you supposed to do when your beloved dog is running around the living room like a crazy boy and knocks over a couple of your picture frames, breaking them in the process? Well, if you're anything like me, it's just a perfect opportunity to make your own picture frames. Hey, it's Pete here from Northern Works. Now, there are some really good tutorials of how to make picture frames on YouTube, but they all have one thing in common. And the last time I checked, actually, let me just check again. Nope, still haven't got a table saw, but I do have some leftover pieces of this oak strip wood from my last project and a bunch of DIY tools. So I'm going to show you two different ways that you can make really nice picture frames without a table saw. I'm going to make classic mitered picture frames, and I've got two different thicknesses of strip wood. So the first thing I need to do is cut this one in half to give me enough material. And I'm going to do that with a circular saw. Well, it's not as easy as a table saw, but it works. Although the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that my homemade track saw track is half a centimetre out. So if you're going to build one of those yourself, get it right. I have to say though, that is pretty good. Right, so I now have to cut these to length, and I'm actually going to do two different kind of miter joints for each of these different thicknesses of wood. I'll show you what I'm going to do with these ones later, but for this more square wood, I'm going to use splined miters. Actually, for most of that, we just use a handsaw. So the good news is I can reuse the backer board and the glass from the other picture frames, which means I've got something to reference off to measure my length. But the bad news is I didn't check the saw blade on my circular saw, and so now I've introduced a weird angle into these pieces, which is annoying because I always check my saw blade. But I reckon it'll be fine if I use the same square edge on the outside of all the pieces. Well, I've already proven that I can't be trusted to cut things straight, so I've intentionally cut these a little bit long, and I'm going to make a shooting board so I can use a plane to clean these up to get them nice and straight. Hard life, is it, Arch? These are almost ready to glue up. But I do still need to cut a recess into the back of all of them. And for that, I'm going to use my super high-tech router table. I mean, look at it. It's even got a movable fence. Those are bob on, those. Get those glued up. All right, well, that's drying. I can show you how I'm going to do the joinery for these other ones. So splines are great for adding strength to a mitre joint, which can be a little bit weaker. But for this second picture frame, I want to add a bit of a flatter profile. So I'm using this thinner oak strip. And that means there's not really space for a spline to go in. So in order to make sure they're still strong, I'm going to use mitered halving joints, which means finding the centre of my piece of stock and then cutting down to that mark, leaving some overlap, half lap, which will then allow a bigger glue up surface, and that extra glue is what gives it the extra strength. Whoops, that's why these things have guards on them. That's not bad, that. I'll admit though, it did take me about 3 goes just working my way closer and closer to get it to fit that nicely. And now I've just got 3 more corners to go. Well, these ended up being a little bit more of a faff than I was expecting. One of the corners wasn't cut at 45 degrees, so I had to clean that up on the shooting board, but it's all good now. Now, the nice thing about using this technique is that now that everything's cut, all I have to do is glue it together, and then it's basically done. There's no need to add any splines. Speaking of splines, right, the glue on this other frame has dried, and so I've cut these 4 splines to go into the corners, which I'll be honest was surprisingly hard. It's really difficult to find a safe and accurate way of cutting small blocks of wood without a table saw. And in the end, what I did was screw down these small offcuts of ash so that I could run my homemade track saw along and make these cuts, but it wasn't particularly accurate. It'll do the job, but it wasn't super accurate. And the reason for all of that faff is because what I'm really looking for is to make sure I've got straight grain that can go into my splines, and that'll make them a lot stronger. I've cut each of these splines down to around about 5mm, maybe slightly less, and that's because this is the smallest router bit that I've got. I did think about using the circular saw and cutting this with kerfs, but after my experience today, I just think that would be incredibly unsafe. So I'm going to use this router and use the fence and just guide it through gently at a 45-degree angle. Well, that was terrifying. I mean, it worked, sort of, but terrifying. Well, I've learned loads making these picture frames, and while I'm cleaning them up, I want to share 3 lessons that I've learned. And the first one is that yes, you can make really nice picture frames without access to big, expensive power tools. Now, this is a bit of a theme of a lot of the projects on my channel, but I'm genuinely surprised at how well these have turned out, especially considering this is the first time I've made picture frames. Well, that's not true, actually. I did make a picture frame once out of an old pallet, but that fell apart after about 3 days and was just held together by some masking tape and the poster that was in it, so I don't think that really counts. But these, like, yeah, they're a bit ropey some places and I'll have to fill in some of the gaps with some sawdust, but for a first try, I'm actually quite pleased with these, and they're definitely, it's just a confidence builder to try and make more projects like this in the future. My second lesson is that if you design around the tools that you've got, it's going to be a lot easier in the actual build process. Now, I'm really happy with how both of these picture frames has come, but I have to say that I definitely enjoyed the process of making the mitered halving joints a lot more than those splines. Maybe it's just the tools that I'm more confident with, but cutting those half laps with the circular saw and some chisels was definitely a lot less terrifying than trying to cut those splines in with the router table, and cutting the actual splines themselves was damn near impossible with a circular saw. I think there's an old saying in woodworking that the smaller the piece that you've got, the bigger the tool you need, and yeah, there's definitely some truth to that, because if I had a massive bandsaw, I think cutting those splines would have been a piece of cake. And the last lesson, I didn't need a table saw to make really nice picture frames, but I kind of want one. See you again.